I had known Michael's work since architecture school. I had seen the posters that he had done for Yale, and that's how I first became familiar with him. Years later, I'd come to recognize that Michael's work influenced many parts of my life that I interacted with on a daily basis, or at least knew. Some of those brands being the New York Times, Hillary Clinton's 2016 campaign where he designed the iconic H logo, Saks Fifth Avenue, Verizon, Mastercard, the AIA, Walk NYC Graphic Standards. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so naturally I sent an email to Pentagram, trying to figure out, basically proposing who and what we were going to be in this next chapter. I didn't expect a reply, but they surprisingly did reply, and they continued to reply over and over and over again. Michael and Johnny have been generous, thoughtful, and incredibly creative collaborators, and we are so grateful to have them on our side. So thank you guys. Their work didn't just rebrand us, it re-energized our organization. They created a banner for all of us at Space City to rally behind and allowed us to carve out a place of our own in our community and beyond. Yeah, and I also just wanted to give a special shout out to Johnny, who is a Seattle native. Yeah. Many of his friends and family are here tonight. Johnny is incredibly talented, and we are so excited to see what's next for him. So yeah, thank you, Johnny. Let's give a big warm welcome to Michael Bierut and Jonny Sikov.
Thank you, Kyle. You guys can hear me okay? Okay. I'm Michael Bierut. I will be serving as the warm-up act for Seattle native Jonny Sikov. So be patient. My part will be over soon enough. I want to thank the people of this extraordinary organization, Space City. It's been wonderful working with them all these past years. They were patient when I had some personal issues that required us to kind of reschedule the talk originally planned for the end of September till today, and here we all are. So thank all of you for being flexible and showing up for this one. We really appreciate it too. So I want to thank not just Kyle, but Julia, Stephen, Osil, Sierra, Anton, Grant, and some of the founders of Space City who I've met, Susan, Lauren, and Grant here, are just really testimony to what enthusiasm and energy can do to activate a community as it has happened here in Seattle. So we are just really thrilled and honored to be part of that story. So that's me. I'm not Lebanese, and I'm not from Lebanon. I'm actually from a suburb of Cleveland, Ohio called Parma, just due south of Cleveland, as you see there. Oops. Stand by. Hey, Parma, Ohio. Let's give it up for Parma, Ohio. It's the 9th biggest city in Ohio. Okay. I'm from Parma. This is almost exactly today's date. This is Easter Sunday, May 1969. I am in the back wearing a dark suit with a narrow tie, just like I am today. That's my mom and dad, and those are my younger brothers who are fraternal twins. Their names are Ronald and Donald. That sort of gives you an idea of the cultural milieu of Parma, Ohio. My mom still thinks she always says, why do people think that's funny? Why shouldn't they have rhyming names? So Parma looks like this. It's just I'd say even a lower middle class suburb. And I grew up knowing very little about architecture and art and design. I love to draw, and thank goodness my mom with that amazing hat and my dad, who sold printing presses for a living, knew just enough to encourage me. So good for them. I moved to New York after getting educated at the University of Cincinnati and lucked into a job with this couple. This is Leila and Massimo Vignelli. They were among the most prominent designers in New York when I arrived there 45 years ago in June 1980. Leila is they're both trained as architects, which accounts for, again, why Johnny and I are here, I believe. Leila was from Udine, Italy. Massimo was from Milano. And they hired me because they heard I was from Parma. This is what I knew about architecture when I arrived in New York. I had read this book, and the most famous architect I knew the name of was a guy named Howard Rourke. I really didn't know much beyond that. I knew about Frank Lloyd Wright and a couple of the other ones, but really didn't know much about the world of architecture. But because the Vignellis had devoted so much of their practice to collaborating with architects, that ignorance got remedied very, very quickly. Massimo specifically was one of the people who stewarded modernism into the United States in the form of his work for contract furniture companies and product designers such as Knoll, work he did for Stendig Furniture, including this calendar, which, as you can see, is still extant and being sold today. Notably in New York, he did the signage for the New York subway system and designed a legendary map that was my sole souvenir I took home with me when I did a field trip to New York from Ohio in 1974, little knowing that I'd be working eventually for the man who had designed it. You design fans who happen to like this map may be gratified to know that after having been put aside for a more literal and not quite as, in my opinion, nice map back in 1979. It is going to be restored this year as the official map. A version of this will be restored as the official map of the New York City subway system. So hooray for geometry, and geometry is always better than geography if you're a designer. You know that, right? So here's me in my early days. This is probably about 42 years ago. Massimo on the left, Leila on the right, me in the middle. I worked at Vignelli Associates for 10 years and got introduced to some clients and some projects that would have incredible influence over my whole career up till this very day. After 10 years there, I took my second and only other job I've had. I've really had to pad my LinkedIn page to make it look like I've done stuff, but I've really only basically had 2 jobs. 10 years for Vignelli, now 35 years working at this place, Pentagram. I sometimes tell people that Vignelli Associates was sort of monotheistic, where there was but one God, and his name was Vignelli. Pentagram is polytheistic. There are if not gods, many prima donnas, if you will, of which I am one. It's a collaborative partnership made up of 23 partners who operate in 4 studios around the world, including one in New York, which is where I work. That's me there. And what I'll do is I'll take you through some of the projects I've done over the years, some of which I started while I was still working at Vignelli, some of which I undertook when I got to Pentagram. All of them sort of bring to life sort of what happens when the worlds of graphic design and architecture collide. Often I've been asked to collaborate with architects and figure out some way to, if that screen goes black, I won't notice it because it looks great on this little screen here. So wave frantically at me if something's wrong up there, okay? Don't just politely nod as if like, don't pretend you see something if it's not there, okay? I'll take you through just a handful of case studies of a couple of things we've done that I think in a way have led up to the work we've done for Space City. Kyle mentioned this very long-running project that we've done with the Yale School of Architecture, actually. We were called in by the former dean, Robert A.M. Stern, who I had worked with on a number of projects, mostly books, occasionally signage, and he had arrived at Yale at what he described as a point where he felt they were insufficiently broadcasting to the world the many things that were happening there. And I think he was summoned in there to take some of his immense energy and put it at the service of his alma mater. His appointment was viewed by some people with alarm because the architects here at least will know that in many circles he's associated with a kind of attention to history that leads to very historicizing solutions to designs. If you have a college campus where all the buildings are Georgian and you want a building that will fit in perfectly with those other Georgian buildings, Robert Ames Stern Architects can deliver to that with expertise, finesse, and real beauty. Okay, but if you're looking for iconoclastic design that is not based on historical models, you wouldn't think he'd be the person you'd look to. He resented this point of view, actually, because he was like he sort of made a strict division between how he chose to practice, but what he thought good pedagogy and architectural education was. And he intended to kind of confound people with what he was going to bring to the Yale School of Architecture syllabus. And so I had a strategic presentation that consisted, I think, of the 3 pieces of paper, which I think I have in order right now. The first one is this one. I just said, Bob, this is what people think is going to happen. But I said, I think this is what you want to have happen. So as opposed to using a single typeface, which is what I had learned over 10 years you should do to build a brand from Massimo Vignelli, I said, let's never use the same typeface twice. Let's just kind of keep people off balance, keep changing it up, make it so that, in a way, this consistent inconsistency was the hallmark of what was happening at Yale. And so we then started doing a whole series of things. The centerpiece was a poster program that, again, just never really did the same thing twice. So you can tell how far back this goes, right? Younger people in the audience who may have seen Mad Men will remember Don Draper giving a presentation using a slide projector. That is how presentations used to happen at the Yale School of Architecture in the early 90s when we started doing this work. So these are little slides that are promoting a lecture series, or arrows that are all different, or quotation marks that are all different, or one big exclamation mark, or framing elements that are all different. And then they do symposia, and each one of those has a separate theme. And the one thing that keeps them all together, you'll see there's a Y in a circle, not even the same Y, it's always a different Y. For this one, this is about architecture and psychoanalysis. I didn't go to this, so I'm not exactly sure what occurred at this, what revelations were to be had at this symposium. But I sort of said, why don't we take a nice Mies van der Rohe couch and stand up the entire, or lay the entire program down on the couch, as is shown here, and then that Y, if you can tell from the back row, that's a Rorschach blot that makes a Y. I thought that was all very clever. And so this is about the future of urbanism with the density of the repetition of the word next cities leading to the very center. A symposium on the legacy of Charles Moore, and you will spot a tribute to Barbara Suffolk of Solomon's graphics at Sea Ranch, if you are eagle-eyed. This is an example of, I was given this title, didn't have any idea what it meant even after it was explained to me, and I just decided just to set it really, really big in hopes that confidence would suffice in place of comprehension. And then they do a series of open houses as well. So all of these things were just sort of one thing after another. Marion Banshees, a local designer here in the Pacific Northwest, did this beautiful lettering for a symposium about architecture and seduction. Open house. And then they were very open to letting us do things, and I just said, what if we just didn't even use big type, everything was the same size, and we just made some bold and underlined others. They let us do that once, never again. About the weaving together of the previously separated city of Berlin. A tribute to George Nelson using one of his famous atomic clock, and the convenient coincidence of George Nelson having exactly 12 letters in it. A lecture series. And so basically, it's just all variations on themes, all the same size, always black and white, always a Y in a circle somewhere, but everything else is intentionally varied. And lots of different games played with legibility and reading and everything else. A whole series of different talented designers worked on these with me as we worked our way from over 2 terms that Bob served as dean there. And then finally, he stepped aside in favor of the first woman dean of the Yale School of Architecture, Deborah Burke. And and it's really funny because Deborah called me in and she said, I want to do things slightly different. I knew exactly the first thing she would ask for. So I said, we picked out some really nice colored paper for you. And so we actually reverted to a lot of things. So we used the same 2 typefaces on this whole series, but like this range of colored paper that I thought was kind of like festive and cheerful and just sort of like brought some energy that instead of the energy coming from the typography, it came from the contrast of the colors. And you sort of see it's the same problem just solved using a different palette of strategies. And sometimes the use of the typography is a little more literal. This was about designing with light material, light material. And sometimes it's just about getting the names out there, about the interconnected world of designing for sustainability, open house posters with big O's. And so again, it sort of is just a whole different way of sorting out, of establishing a theme and variations and working them. Then there was COVID, which created another break, and we decided to use that as an opportunity to introduce still another approach to doing these. And this is deep cut for you graphic designers in the audience. There's a fantastic former instructor at Yale from the era of the 50s and 60s named Bradbury Thompson, who is famous for using cyan, yellow, magenta, and black in his work. He really was a master at doing that. So here he is. And so we decided to do an homage to Professor Thompson in this work and sort of did a whole series of things using sort of the fundamental building blocks of the printing process. Architects have so many things they can use to do their work. We just have these 4 process colors and paper and a handful of typefaces, basically, but we do what we can. This is a almost direct rip-off of his cover, God bless him. So, but you sort of see different ways that we're using, just again to solve the same problem. And so these are all posters, and what's interesting about communicating in the world today is that posters still count for something, but really each of these posters now are translated into GIFs that get distributed through social media. So what this stuff looks like on an Instagram post is actually more important than what the poster looks like, and at least the 2 have to have some complementary relationship. And the CMYK approach really worked beautifully for these animated posters, in my opinion. And so it was mentioned that we worked for the AIA, and I'll show you what the work we did for them, which is still in use today. The AIA has had its ups and downs and ups, as you know, and I think that Space City exists in part because the architectural community is best served by a variety of voices, not just the official, trade association that at the end of the day the AIA is, but actually something that can be by Seattle, for Seattle, as open as Space City is. And I think the 2 have the potential to work in a complementary sort of way. This is a classic branding problem. We just were asked to kind of really see how we could kind of reinvigorate the AIA brand. This is their old seal from when they first started. This seal had within it a lot of the accoutrement that still informs the way the brand looks: eagles, Doric columns, kind of Trajan-style lettering, updated to look like this when we came aboard. And we just decided to kind of like decompose this and figure out a new way to do it. So the way that the AIA looked when we came on them they had taken that eagle and that column and kind of cleaned it up and put it next to the letters AIA like that. So we thought, okay, what if we just took AIA and sort of said, okay, that thing in the middle, there, you already have a Doric column. You don't have to repeat that again. That thing is sort of your Doric column. Oh, usually I talk to people who have no idea what a Doric column is. I apologize to this crowd. And then we also said, why don't we do a custom typeface that is somehow related to the principles of architecture? I don't claim to really fully understand the principles of architecture as much as people in this room, but I said you put that Doric column in the middle, and then what if we sort of, is this post and lintel, sort of like the supporting members are thick and the crossing members are thinner? Right? Sort of? Okay, thank you. And so what if we sort of like did that? So we do a whole typeface where the vertical members are strong and the members that cross are lighter. So those details pervade everywhere, as you see, right? And so we did a custom alphabet for the AIA that all of their communications to this day sort of appear in, sort of demonstrated it could be dark and light, all caps and upper and lower case, and then it can then send out messages. This was when we first undertook this 10 years ago. The conference they were holding was going to be in Chicago, so we were able to quote from, in this case, Daniel Burnham, and kind of do a whole bunch of stuff that's like that, embed the AIA into the word Chicago, and sort of play things out like that, right? And then we did a series of ads talking about the value of architecture in a troubled world. We worked on with them. And then I think the thing that gave me the most satisfaction actually was we did a whole bunch of interviews with architects. We were trying to really figure out how we could make the AIA brand kind of really resonate with them, and kind of landed on this idea of what if we, what if we had sort of a manifesto. And so we wrote something that was just a few paragraphs long, and I think it'll play in a moment with a little bit of musical accompaniment, and you see whether it's meant to lead up to paying off the new identity. You get it? There's like a we in the eye. So, oh, thank you. Then I'll show you the last project I have is the longest running project I've done in my career. When I started working for Vignelli Associates in June 1980, the very first thing I was given to do was something for the Architectural League of New York, which I think is sort of what we make do with in New York. In place of having Space City there, we have the Architectural League of New York. The league has been around when I joined Vignelli. They've been around for 125 years. And Massimo, my boss and my mentor, was on their board. And as a board member, he sort of was the go-to guy to do graphic design for them. And his wife, Layla Vignelli, who was responsible for having the place not go bankrupt every week, among other things, was always trying to get Massimo to kind of like not do the freebies, the pro bono work himself, but to lay it off on someone who billed at a lower rate. This is just business advice for anyone in the audience who wants to know how to run a business. Evidently, that's what you're supposed to do. And so I had the lowest billing rate in the office. And so she said, Massimo, let the kid from Cincinnati do it. And so I sort of got saddled with doing this work for the league in the early 80s. And I've done it basically ever since. So their logo, again, they look like this: lady, palette, all this stuff. It was formed, as I said, now nearly 150 years ago, as a place to convene artists, architects, builders, everyone involved with creating the built environment, and give them a forum to communicate, come together, debate, and create a community, very much like this one here. They have a number of programs that still continue to this day, one called Emerging Voices, where they spot up-and-coming mid-career, early-career architects and give them a platform to present their work. I did that, a poster for them every year for a solid decade. Is anyone in this audience a fan of the 70s band Chicago? These are like how Chicago did their album covers, basically. They had the same logo every time, except they just would do it a slightly different way depending on what the theme was. So depending on whether it was about eclecticism or whatever, we changed it up. They had a series of one-off lectures by Emilio Ambas that were about the monumentally informal. So I did this one, or another one called Unfinished Modern. There wasn't really in the early days, much of a theme to these things. Everything was sort of like a one-off. They have a competition for young architects that used to be called the Young Architects Forum, and each competition has a theme. The theme this year the year they did this was the theme Bridges, and the challenge was to not make it look like it was a competition to design a literal bridge. It was about metaphoric bridges, and someone on the committee knew this picture of these Scottish engineers demonstrating the cantilever principle behind the Firth of Forth Bridge. That's what you see here. The year after that, it was called Hypotheses. The year after, a year or two later, it's called Scale. This is anticipating Space City a little bit. There's no statute of limitations nor intellectual property law around big black dots, evidently. And so we've also designed books for them, posters, white dots. And then they have a thing every year called the Beaux-Arts Ball, and we do a thematic thing for that as well that has different kinds of themes. The theme of this year was light years. The theme of this year was craft, and you can sort of see CRAFT superimposed there. And then this involves creating a lot of swag and stuff, and sometimes animated gimmicks that, again, go out on social media. Depending on what the theme is, T for threshold, 2016 was called Tabula Rasa. And again, there's just a series of little things we do for these things. And then we did one year was called Alchemy. And so again, sort of the opportunity to animate these guys as well as just print a nice thing with them. It's really fun. If you can't animate it with digits, you can use a little old-fashioned flip book even. And so living in New York, it's the biggest thrill that I have is every once in a while finding someone carrying one of the tote bags that I worked on the subway. And I always ask permission. I say, can I take a picture of your tote bag? And usually they let me do it. Last year's theme was heat, and so we had this nice series of images centered on this animation that then turned into posters and swag and all sorts of other stuff they did there. Some of my team members packing it in. And then they do this thing called the President's Medal, where they do an honorary gala, and one year they did Massimo and Layla Vignelli, my mentors, and we did a program that had 10 different quotes from the Vignellis on it. And so at every table of 10, everyone had a different program with a different quote from them on it. And then here's Massimo with one of the press sheets from it there. And so he was, basically what I learned about the world of architecture, the world of design, how to be a designer, I learned basically from him and from Mrs. Vignelli. And so it was just a real honor to get to do this sort of as a bookend to the work that, in fact, he had introduced me to, decades and decades before. And, and then finally we got around to really redesigning the medal that Massimo actually got. There was a little bit of an homage to that poster I did earlier as well. So the idea of mentorship is really important to me because I learned from the best how important it was for me in my career. And so here is a picture of a kind of quasi going away party that we had after I'd announced my semi-retirement from my somewhat successful or unsuccessful semi-retirement from Pentagram. And this was some of the team members that were working with me about a year ago. And I call your attention to a local hero, Jonny Sikov, who is identified second from the left in the bottom row here. And I invite him to come up to the stage to take you through part two, the climax of the presentation. So please welcome Seattle's own Jonny Sikov.
So I'm Jonny Sikov. As Kyle mentioned, thank you, Kyle, for the nice intro at the beginning of this. I did grow up in Seattle in a small apartment complex on 175th and Aurora in North Seattle. Shoreline, if you're familiar with that area. Here's a photo of me and my brother and our neighbor, Bata. If it's not clear, I'm the one with the red hair. And like Michael's mom and Ronald and Donald, my mom also could not resist the urge to give us practically the same name. So growing up, I actually, the idea of design did not come into my consciousness until very late in high school in 2001 when the first Apple iPod was released. I could not afford one at the time, but I had friends who had one, and I was immediately obsessed with this object. I became curious and wanted to know kind of who got to decide who gets to decide what these objects are like and how they're made. I learned that that was a thing called industrial design and that it was done by people who look like this. By 2007, I was admitted into the University of Washington, and out of curiosity, I went to the UW Design Open House. This is not a photo from then, but I saw some things that looked like this, and I was, as somebody who didn't draw, I was immediately intimidated and thought to myself, this is probably not for me. It wasn't until about a year later that I was filling out my schedule for the quarter, and based on certain time constraints and certain credit constraints, I was basically forced to take Design 166, which is the foundation class at University of Washington, for the design program, and essentially serves as a weeder class for the design program. I immediately found out, as many others have, that this is a really difficult class, but I had amazing professors, including Christine Matthews, who introduced me to my first taste of Joseph Müller-Brockmann. And I think it was immediately at this point I decided, yes, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I graduated. I tried really hard to avoid working for these three companies. Based on my sort of naive perceptions of what design was and what good design was, I also avoided working for the small number of agencies in the Seattle area that inevitably do work for all of these companies. So essentially, by accident, I became a freelance designer, and I did work with small studios in the area and also independent projects. In 2014, I made the wise decision to move to New York during the coldest winter in 40 years. I was neighbors with Morgan Spurlock of Super Size Me fame. And I did more freelance projects. And at this time, I was doing work with both studios in New York and studios in Seattle. One of those studios was a studio called Small Stuff, led by Dinah Freed and Joe Marianic here. You can see me in the background. And Joe happened to work for Michael for several years. And when I found out that Michael had an opening on his team, I asked him if he would write an introduction. And on March 13th, 2017, he wrote probably the nicest thing that anyone has ever written about me. It was mostly lies, but it was very nice. And about 1 hour later, I got an email from Michael saying, would you set up a time to meet with my mysterious project manager, Tess McCann? 1 hour after that, I got an email from Tess McCann. And to my horror, she said, are you free tomorrow morning at 10 a.m.? And so less than 24 hours later, I was on my way to Pentagram to meet Michael Bierut. A lot of things stick out from that conversation, but one of the most memorable was that Michael did not only know, but was a fan of the work of Doug Wadden, who's a local design hero and former professor and chair of the UW design program. He even admitted to me that he may or may have not once ripped off Doug Wadden and had to write an apology letter to him. So basically, ever since, we've been together. I wasn't counting, but I was curious, and so I looked up in our Pentagram's administrative tools, and basically exactly 2 weeks from today, I will have been there for 8 years, and I've had the opportunity to work on countless amazing projects alongside Michael and other partners at Pentagram, more than I have time to talk about, but here are a few. But one project that is particularly meaningful to me and obviously very relevant for obvious reasons is the work that we've done over the last few years for Space City. So when Space City came to us, this was sort of the visual universe that they were living in. And, you know, it's sort of a challenge that I think a lot of nonprofits and small organizations have where you have limited resources, and there was never really sort of like a consolidated effort to create a cohesive look and feel for their communications. And so essentially, you know, every single piece of communication was a one-off, and each poster responding to the themes and ideas of their respective keynote speaker. And perhaps the only thing sort of tying them together was a small logo in the corner. So this wasn't the only, but it was sort of the first input to our process and how we started thinking about the project. This particular logo is based on a typeface called Agency Gothic from the 1930s. And beyond sort of having kind of the Art Deco stylings of that time period is probably the second most used typeface in movie posters, next to Trajan, for those of you who are nerds. So we were looking for something a little bit more vanilla that we thought would allow for a little bit of a greater range of expression from poster to poster, speaker to speaker, and we thought, what's more vanilla than Helvetica? So the first thing that we tried was just setting the name in Helvetica, and then we started having kind of like long conversations about the dot that was separating space and city. To us, it was sort of like a strange relic of the .com era, but we also thought that maybe there was some potential in there to kind of harness it and basically create a graphic motif out of it. And then once we sort of sketched this, we realized that there's sort of an implied double entendre, whether intentional or not, with the name Space City, both speaking to civic and built environments, but also a reference to locale and the Space Needle and the city in which the organization resides. And so this, to us, was kind of a fun and subtle nod to what would be an architectural plan view of the Space Needle. And then we said, you know, what if we didn't use the logo in sort of a traditional sense as sort of an endorsing sign-off, which is sort of the common way of doing things. If you're sort of Yale, that works well. But one of the goals of this project was to actually establish and build a profile for Space City that they so deserve. So we said, instead of doing your logo like this, what if you just made it the biggest thing on the page and put it in the center every single time? And then we started exploring, how could we exploit this framework in different ways, whether that's sort of setting up a graphic language for typography, how the logo could interact with photography, ways in which, the graphic application could make the logo recede in the background, ways that it could do the opposite. And we essentially did this over and over and over again until we got to a point where we thought that it had the flexibility and the utility that we thought could work and sustain itself over a longer period of time. In 2023, or towards the end of 2023, we started trialing this system on a few posters. And by 2024, we established a calendar that would announce the speakers for the entire year. Here we have Michael Bierut, which obviously did not happen, but is happening now. For Jennifer Bonner and her talk entitled Candy Sandwiches and Hats, we used the vernacular of confectionery and retail design. And for Daniel Innocente's talk, we used the visual language of space travel. And for the most recent calendar for 2025, we established this motif that suggests all of the speakers contributing to Space City. And most recently, we developed this poster for Quang Von Glino and their talk, There Is Room. The starting point for each of these posters is slightly different. For Perry Culper, who is an architect and educator at the University of Michigan, we are very much inspired by his work, which deals with collage and using fragments of paper and found elements to create these compositions. Perry was extremely generous with us and sort of allowed us to emulate his process and use his material to sort of scavenge elements for the purposes of the poster. And we kept coming across this sort of concentric motif again and again. And that became sort of the basis for the poster design for Perry. For Kendall Latham, who works for Glossier as a retail designer, we were very much struck by the simplicity and the beauty of this display strategy that he had developed for retail. And that became almost a literal abstraction of what you see here. And finally, for Joshua Ramus and his talk, Rethinking Flexibility, he talks about the notions of flexibility and how contemporary architecture still relies on the antiquated modernist vision of flexibility, a blank slate upon which any activity can occur. And so in his talk, he sort of posited that actually flexibility comes from the specificity of the design and having sort of discrete spaces where specific activities happen. And this was the basic premise for the program in the very building that we're standing. So that early conceptual sketch became an actual literal representation of the building that was later built. And our poster for Joshua Ramus is a reference to both the physical building, but also the conceptual idea that established the idea. And then finally, for our talk, we're given basically the most meta brief ever, Pentagram designing a poster for Space City about Pentagram's work, designing posters for Space City. So we wanted to figure out a way, because it was so comically self-referential, how could we add as little as possible to the poster and still make it interesting? And so one of the decisions that we made was to basically reveal the basic framework sitting behind the poster spell out the information as simply as possible, and emphasize sort of the material quality of paper by repeating it again and again. And by creating variations of this same idea, we were able to kind of print several posters all around a theme, but different compositions from one to the next. And of course, we had a digital interpretation of this for social media. So as Kyle mentioned, we have a happy hour after this at LMNN Shop. We printed off special editions of the posters signed by me and Michael. We would love it if you guys come, chat, maybe buy a poster for the low, low price of $29.99. For those of you that are interested in buying anything, we'll have a newsprint of all of these posters collected for free, and we would appreciate it if you guys come grab one. And I think we have a few minutes for Q&A, so thank you guys.